Hey everybody, welcome back to Jennifer's Garden. Today I'm going to show you how to start a sourdough starter. So a sourdough start is nothing more than flour and water mixed together at room temperature and left to ferment. So what the fermentation process actually does is takes the yeast out of the air, out of your natural environment, which your yeast content in your house is different than mine. It's different everywhere in a hot climate and a cold climate. And it takes that yeast and it produces a good bacteria called lactobacillus. So during the fermentation process, the yeast and the bacteria convert the simple sugars within the flour to produce multiple different substances like carbon dioxide. That's when you get the bubbles in your sourdough start. That actually is the leaven that you would use in your bread, so that makes it rise. It also produces ethanol and other substances like acids like lactic acid, acetic acid, and the acids are what give the sourdough bread the sour flavor. Your sourdough starter is actually going to replace your commercial yeast products. That's why it has become kind of more popular. So the long fermentation process of one, the sourdough starter, and two, the longer time that it would take you to make your bread during its own natural fermentation process, the bacteria produces enzymes that actually break down the gluten proteins and actually lowers the gluten content. So it's easier for you to digest, actually. So there are 5 stages within your sourdough start that you will see and that you're going to look out for. So the first one is you're feeding it. The first step is feeding it. The second step is rising. So you're going to watch your sourdough starter rise. That means that the good bacteria in there is actually eating all those simple sugars within your flour. Then it's actually going to peak. So what peaking means is that you're going to see it look almost like a round dome on the top. So it's going to peak and then it's going to collapse. That's the 4th step. So you'll see it collapse once it starts getting flatter, and it almost is like concaved, and you can almost see it like pull away from the sides of your jar. And then the last stage is starving. So you definitely have to get your start to that starving level because it's eating every last little bit of sugars within that protein. It's breaking everything down really well, and then it's ready for a good feed. So I'm going to show you what to do for about the first 7 days. I recommend waiting longer than 7 days to start using it for bread, but you can most certainly use it at day 7. So I'm going to show you a couple of days worth of feedings, and then you're on your own. So I'm going to show you what we need for it. You just need a glass jar, warm water, not hot, but more than lukewarm. And I use bread flour. Bread flour has a higher gluten content, so your starter has more food to eat when it's eating. So you can use all-purpose flour. I just find it better to use the bread flour. I also use wooden utensils. If you don't have one of these, I have no idea what it's called, you can use the back end of a wooden spoon. This is to stir. And so what we're going to do is, you're not going to use a lot, 1/4 cup. I just use a 1/4 cup. You can use as much or as little as you want, but I'll tell you why here in just a second. I just use the 1/4 cup. 1/4 cup in. I do not measure my water. I measure for consistency. So 1/4 cup. Then I pour a little bit in at a time of the water, and I'm going to start mixing. I want this to be the consistency of very thick peanut butter. So see, I've used up all the water. I'm going to add a tiny bit more. I'm strictly looking for the consistency. I'm going to wipe it off. I actually still do this with my aged start. We're a little doughy, tiny bit more. I know that does not seem like a lot, but again, we are just starting a brand new start. You want to make sure it's very well mixed in. Yeah, that looks good. And I know there's not a lot in here, but we're just making a start. So we're going to get into discard in just a second, and that's why. And I keep saying, because we don't want to discard a lot. And you're like, what is discard? Okay, so I got everything off of my little wooden spoon thingy. And I scrape down my sides because I'm used to doing this in my big start. So there we go. There's your first day of your sourdough starter. That's another thing. When you leave it out, I just use a regular top to a jar, a canning jar, and just stick it on the top. It's going to get air in there, but it's going to prevent stuff from falling in it or whatever. But it can still let off gases and accept air and yeast into it. So this is how I leave it on the counter, just with a top. Boop. Day 2 of the sourdough start. See, it's a little uneventful. So I'm just going to discard half of this. Take this off. I'm going to discard half, and then we're going to feed it again just like we did yesterday. I'm just going to put it in this bowl just so you can kind of see. It still smells like flour and water. It's pretty thick and doughy, but that's okay. We're just building this, and it's not a lot, as you can see. So now we're going to do the same thing. 1/4 cup of flour, and then just enough water so I can mix it. And then mix it really good. Just a smidge more. And again, it still smells like flour and water, as it should, because we're going to be building all this good bacteria. There we go. Scrape the sides. And if you can see, it's just a little bit more than it was yesterday. So I'm going to put my rubber band back on. Now it didn't really grow that much yesterday. That's the first day. That's okay. There we go. And then we'll let it set for another 24 hours. And while we're on a roll, we're going to feed Florence. So I made bread this morning, and she's still bubbly because she's old, but I used more than half of it, so I don't have to discard this. So for me, Florence is going to get 3/4 of a cup of flour, bread flour, and then I'm going to feed her in this jar, and then I'm going to give her a new jar because this is getting kind of gunky. That way you can kind of see what an established starter looks like. The older they get, it seems to be a little bit better at mixing it. Here we go. Then I'm going to leave her on the counter with the top on, just a lid. That way she can grow, and then I will put her in the refrigerator for the week. Let me make sure you can see this as she pours out. I tend to mix it up in the old jar first and then pour her into a nice new jar so she looks pretty. Scrape everything out. There. Now, I like to make sure I have every last little bit for her. And then I'll put the rubber band on because she usually doubles in size now within about 6 hours. So, and I'm going to put my lid on, just set it on, and then she'll grow. Okay, this is day 3. Look at those bubbles. Now, here's my line. She grew up to here. So that's pretty good. So she more than doubled in size. You can see all the bubbles in there. And she's starting to smell sour. All right, so we're gonna discard half. I'm just gonna put it in this bowl because I'm throwing it away. See, make sure you can see here. You can hear it. Look at that nice gluten formation. Isn't that cool? All right, so let's get rid of it. It's still a little tight on the top here. To me, that's still a little doughy. Goodbye. Now we're gonna do another 1/4 cup of flour. And then I pour the water in to make it the consistency that I want. And just stir it up. There we go. She's all mixed in and ready for another 24 hours. So I'm going to put my rubber band right at the line. And then just rest my top on it and leave it on my counter. I'll see you tomorrow. Day 4. Looking good, nice and bubbly. We're going to discard half again. It's starting to get a little better pouring. Bloop. Then another 1/4 cup of bread flour and enough water to mix it. There we go, all mixed. Let it set for another 24 hours. Day 5. Doing good. Just getting a little thin. One-quarter cup of bread flour. Just enough water to mix. There we go, another 24 hours. Okay, this is day 6. Bubbles. We're gonna pour half of it out. Then we're gonna put a 1/4 cup of bread flour. And just enough water to mix it together. And as you can see, it's starting to get taller and taller. And then tomorrow's day 7, and you will be able to, you technically can use it on day 7, but I tend to wait a little bit longer. And you can feel your sourdough start out. Maybe you need to feed it a little sooner or a little bit longer. Just depends on where you live. There we go. Fed. Put the hair tie at the line, put the top on it, and we'll feed it again tomorrow. Day 7. Here she is, bubbly, bubbly. I'm going to discard half. Quarter cup of bread flour, just enough water to mix. Scrape the sides again. There we go. Now that it's been 7 days, you can wait for it to double and you can use it. I hope that video was helpful, and as always, from my coop to yours, thank you for growing with me so I can grow with you.